It's called being efficient, and that's the goal, is to be very efficient with your time. At Oklahoma State, if something doesn't work, you find a better way. In Iowa, if something doesn't work, you just do it harder. It was very much a technical approach, and they said your wrestling, as you get better, your wrestling should get smaller, not bigger. You have got to quit wrestling in all positions. We've got to focus you where your strengths are. First part of the season, there was very little live wrestling, and we freaking didn't like it.
Welcome to the Athletes Ocean podcast. I've got Coach Nick Purler with me here today from Purler Wrestling, and we're going to talk Oklahoma State wrestling. Not just Oklahoma State wrestling, but the Okie style of wrestling. And Coach, I know this is something that you continue to preach through your club, and it's something that I'm curious about. I've got some preconceived notions about, but I want to hear your perspectives on Oklahoma State style.
Yeah, well, there's been some changes because when I was there back in the early 90s, John Smith was still training. And so I gray shirted, then red shirted. And for the first couple years, I was John's main workout partner. And even through the last couple years of his career, I would travel the nation and do John Smith camps with just me and John. And, we'd go once, twice a day. So I learned a lot from him, but he was still an athlete. And I would probably say a lot of my success in wrestling and now as a business owner comes from the time I've spent at Oklahoma State and with John. It's amazing how when you surround yourself with those type of human beings, how it changes you. And I always encourage, our better athletes. Hey, you know what? Less scholarship money, who cares? You want to go be around those humans, okay? It was just life changing. I can't even explain it. I'm so glad I went there a bit. So we had Joe C was our head coach, and then went through a lot of the NCAA issues. Some of that was football related from decades before, and then Joe C broke a few minor rules, such as like getting hotels for us to go to open red shirt tournaments and things. So
The nerve.
I lost off and on my freshman year. I lost all of my sophomore year, and I lost all postseason wrestling my junior year.
Wow.
So the NCAA, I'm not a big fan of, and they really and I was just a kid, I didn't know. There's like go to this tournament, so I went. But so Joe basically, he lost his job, and then there was a year there where there was really no coach. Kenny Monday and John Smith were kind of the co-interim coaches, but they were never around. Dave Martin was the NCAA champion at Iowa State. He was our athletic director at the time. He was roommates with Dan Gable, so he would come down and run practice. Tommy Tresbro was the head coach there for 15 years before Joe. He was still working in Gallagher, Iowa. And so he would come down and run practice sometimes. It was kind of like the year of no coaches, and kind of a mess. But so that was my sophomore year. And then my junior year is when John took over. So we kind of had three different coaching swings there. And when John took over, he was 27-year-old kid. So, the way they did at Oklahoma State for the other 28 years of John Smith or 29, 30 years of John Smith, I'm sure was different than I experienced because he was only 27 when he took over. And he was a first year coach my junior year. And then obviously we have David Taylor there now. So I will speak on the experience that I had. That's but as you can see, it's kind of an interesting angle I'm going to give, which might actually be worthwhile for your listeners.
No, I think that's perfect because what I want to break down is the guiding principles behind the program and the style, right? Because the way that I look at it, we've got the big three in the wrestling world right now, right? And what I don't want to happen is I think that a lot of coaches will base their high school teams off of the Iowa style, or they'll base it off of the Oklahoma State style, or they'll base it off of what they think the Penn State style is. And right now, you have David Taylor coming from the Penn State style. He's not going to all of a sudden adopt a new philosophy now that he's the Oklahoma State head coach, right? He's going to do pretty much in line with what he has been training the last decade, right? So I just don't want this style to go by the wayside because I think the Oklahoma State style is a great style for high school coaches to implement and other college coaches to implement. And I know
Yeah.
that, the branches of this coaching tree, because I know Oklahoma State usually promotes from within, right? Oklahoma State graduates. And then on top of that, it's like, well, if you go and look at the way Coleman Scott runs his program or Kevin Ward runs his program or any of these other head coaches that went to Oklahoma State, I think they stay very in line with the principles that they learned while they were at school there. So that's kind of what I want to talk about. And more than anything, I think that it boils down to drilling and
Hmm.
not just an emphasis on drilling, but hey, drillers make killers, and we are going to spend way more time in these very specific positions and have a system from every position so that it
Hmm.
almost makes wrestling simple because you're like, hey, if I'm in this position and I don't get the single leg, which of these details did you lose out on? Which of these details did you neglect? What do you need to train more of? So I want to hear your perspective on
Yeah.
that take.
So you might remember a guy, Ray Brinzer. You're familiar with Ray. You got to contact him because he wrestled at Oklahoma State for a couple of years, and then he ended up just leaving. He's very eccentric, right?
Hmm.
He would walk around campus in 10-degree weather with flip-flops, shorts, and a jacket and no shirt. They called him Jesus on campus. He looked like Jesus. And then he left for Bulgaria to train Greco. And then he ended up testing out of 3 years of college and going to Iowa, and he was All-American at Iowa in the
The
in
crazy
the
ones are always good.
late 90s. Yeah. And so he said at Oklahoma State, if something doesn't work, you find a better way. In Iowa, if something doesn't work, you just do it harder. And I thought that was very interesting tactic. But at Oklahoma State, from what something that stuck out to me, a few things. Number one was John Smith would say this, and Joe C. They would say, if you can't keep me off of your left leg, you can't beat me. They were like, I don't care how bad you want it. I don't care about your mental toughness. I don't care how many push-ups you can do. Nothing matters. So I really feel like, when you start looking at Penn State, they're 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 and Kale talks about reading the book The Talent Code, and I've read it like 3 times. And if you study the Brazilian soccer growth, it's all because of futsal. And their foot is on the ball like 19 times more than anywhere else in the world. And so the more you're wrestling, that's the reason, like at our camps, we don't do push-ups, we don't run, none of that. Not that it's bad, but when you come to camp, it's got to be all wrestling. So our philosophy is we're going to start wrestling within 30 seconds of practice, and our warm up is wrestling, our conditioning is wrestling, our wrestling is wrestling. And so that's all Oklahoma State there. But the whole philosophy of this, if you can't keep me off your left leg, you can't beat me. Nothing else matters. So it's kind of when I was a wrestler there, it was boiled down to that. So it was very much a technical approach. I do think there were some transitional times there where John Smith was basically, lighting up the world. And so Joe C was kind of trying to force us sometimes to wrestle like John. And then when John took over, he thought he had cracked the code for wrestling. And he even admits that was a big mistake, trying to force guys to wrestle like him. So it was I was kind of caught in that. Um, you know, my brother was NCAA champ. I was All-American, but my dad was like he thought Oklahoma State, that kind of forced style kind of messed us up. It really helped me, I think, but maybe not my brother so much. But so that was weird. But then Kerry Colott talks about this also, that weird era. Then you had the Brands brothers just come out of nowhere. They were good high school wrestlers, but I mean, way above average, but they weren't national champs. I don't think any of them even won a high school state title their senior year. But now they're winning everything, right? And
Right.
so Colott talks about this too. He's like, you had this weird thing, and here he is trying to be the best in the world. He was at Penn State back then. He's like, you watch all these Oklahoma State stuff and all the low single leg and everything. And then you see everybody else trying to wrestle the whole Iowa style. And he's like, it was a very weird time. And that's the thing that I grew up in. But I would say I can't speak for how John did things in the last few decades of his career, but I know when I got there, I was kind of in that weird transitional time. But it really kind of helped me. And because I wrestled, John called it from the touch, right? So it wasn't like underhooking and pulling on their head and a lot of heavy, hard hand fighting. It was kind of touch and go, elbows, little feints. And John even says this to this day, if you're trying, and I teach it, and I think it's right. If I'm not trying to break your wrestling stance like this, I'm
Hmm.
not doing that. I'm just trying to pull your arm 3 inches out of, or get your wrist here, or pull your head here, or get over there and drop my level. So a lot of times, the more I break your stance, the less I can shoot. So our rule at our wrestling academy is I break your stance, I keep mine. Or better yet, I break your stance, I improve mine, right? Because in wrestling, when I set you up, two things are happening. Um, Number one, I can take you down off of the setup. Number two, I can take you down after you try to improve from my setup. So let's think ankle pick. If I do a slam ankle pick, which is what we call a like a roundhouse collar tie ankle pick, right? I break your stance and I get your head down and I scored off of the broken stance. But if I club your head and you stand up, then I hit my, head swing single leg like Thomas Gilman does. I had to wait for a little second for you to correct your stance. And that's where timing is. And some people are very confused with what's timing? Well, that is what timing is.
Yep.
Okay. We also had a phrase hit out of motion.
Hmm.
So hit out of motion means, kind of from the touch, but also from the outsider space. And some guys could do it, some guys couldn't, right? Um, but so that's something that comes to mind is hit out of motion, and it's very much timing based. But as from a setup standpoint, it was a lot less brutal than what the Iowa style was. And but I
Yeah.
think I think that some work for some and some don't work for others.
I completely agree. And speaking from my own experience at Purler Wrestling, I could say no camp that I went to elevated me faster, right, than that 2 weeks in the musty basement that just absolutely turned me into a killer. And any of the freshmen that we send to that camp, they came back and just by relying on what they learned that summer at your camp, they were immediately a great wrestler for us, right? And they were one of the best guys in the lineup. And even to through my senior year of college, the timing on the dresser dump that I learned, right, which is like, hey, you're going to fake, you're going to put him in a football grip, you're going to circle so he steps, you're going to twist, and you're going to run.
Yeah.
It's like that bailed me out at state. I used that my senior year of college as my best takedown. So it's like that kind of timing, like you're saying, just from repetitive drilling and something that like I've really noticed and I've got on my notes is that drilling your system and the moves that you rely on, it gives you a ton of confidence, right?
Yes.
And the timing, like you said, is developed from repetition, repetition, repetition. But I know even now I do jujitsu, and if I drill the week leading up to a competition, just the moves that I do more than
Mhm.
anything else, right?
Yeah.
Then I'm extremely confident headed into this tournament, and my timing is really good, and everything is crisp, you know?
Yeah. I will say, because I know that in your Iowa video, you talk about how they have their guy working their best stuff. Well, at Oklahoma State, we also learned this, and this was very interesting. And they said your wrestling, as you get better, your wrestling should get smaller, not bigger, right? So, for example, and I was, oh, I was wrestling out of the underhook a lot. And as a wrestler, I kind of experimented a lot. I was the desperate wrestler. I wanted to be good so bad that, NCAA champ could say, hop on one foot before your match, and I would have done it, right? So I was extremely coachable, especially, and that's not necessarily a good thing. And so we have a phrase with our guys and our girls. I'm like, hey, don't be too coachable. And I to this day say, what do you think about this? Now I see this as an opportunity for you, possibly. What do you think? Let's try it. I don't say you should do this. Um, but somehow I just decided I'm going to start underhooking everybody. And Bruce pulls me aside. And he goes, like, what the hell are you doing? I'm like, what are you doing? I don't know. And he basically said this. He was like, and this is going to sound weird. He's like, if I watch 10 of your matches and I take a scouting report, all 10 pieces of paper should look the same. I'm like, that makes no freaking sense. He goes, it actually makes a lot of sense. He's like, Nick, this is your problem. He's like, if your opponent overhooks, you'll wrestle from an underhook. If they underhook, you'll wrestle from an overhook. If they want to wrestle from space, you will. If they want to wrestle chest to chest, you'll go chest to chest. If they want a collar tie, you'll do that too. He's
You'll
like, that's
wrestle
the
them
problem.
in their best
Yeah.
positions.
Well, I just feel like I'm like, because my brother and I, we were really I didn't have a life. All I did was wrestle, right? I didn't have a lot of friends. I didn't go to parties. I mean, I was like not a complete dork, but sort of. And I'm still that way. All I like to do is work, right? It's just what I do. I sit in my office and I love to work. I don't have life
You're one of the
balance.
good ones.
I just don't have life balance. I don't understand.
Those people are the most interesting to me.
Yeah. Kind of weird. But because my brother and I, we used to say, we're dangerous. We're freaking dangerous. We were like little white trash, mean kids, right? We sold our four-wheeler and we put wrestling techniques all over our wall and we trained nonstop at my house, right? And my younger brother's friends wouldn't come over. And I just found this out like 10 years ago because Nick and Tony would make him wrestle. I'd have a practice plan for that kid. I would know his strengths and weaknesses. And I'm like, okay, when's Sean getting here? When's Dean getting here? We're going to train. And they would go hide down at the creek. They would hide from us. And I've just been built to be a coach. But so, we were always cocky. And we're like, we're freaking dangerous. We're dangerous because we wanted to be so technical that we could wrestle in every position. And so when Bruce was talking to me, I'm like, dude, I want to be dangerous. I go, I can wrestle from there. He's like, Nick, this is the problem. And this changed my whole outlook. He was like, you're going to wrestle a Bulgarian one day or an Iranian, and their family doesn't eat unless they score from their overhook. He's like, and if they have mastered an overhook or an underhook, and they're the best underhook or whatever on planet Earth, you're not going to beat them there because they're specialized it. You have got to quit wrestling in all positions. We've got to focus you where your strengths are. And I was extremely fast as a wrestler. And he's like, you have got great quickness. And when you underhook somebody, you are wrestling away from your strengths. He's like, your wrestling needs to get compartmentalized and smaller. And I feel like that was very helpful. So, but you can overdo it, right? And so what I'm against the whole style thing and what you talked about a few minutes ago was, and I like to use this as an analogy, if you put this really tall, explosive, lanky, fast young man on the offensive line, he probably couldn't make a high school varsity football team. But if you put him at corner, at wide receiver, he might make millions of dollars. You put the heavyweight, or you put the lineman at wide receiver, he can't do that. So in football, they're not dumb like wrestling coaches. They're like, dude, what the hell? No, you're 380. You can pick up 1,400 pounds. No, we're not going to put you at wide receiver. You're going to be on the offensive line. Oh, no, you're going to go over here. Well, in wrestling, we're trying to say, you need to wrestle this way, or it's getting better. But we fought this for a lot of years and talk about the Iowa style and everything. When you try to make a wrestler wrestle a certain style, it doesn't work. And like Zeke Jones says, your personality has a lot to do with it. And it just does. And you look at Joe Williams, one of the greatest wrestlers ever, I think. Gable used to get so mad at him because he had the athleticism. He's like, you should not have 1, 2, 3 point matches. But he just didn't light everybody up. And there's that famous video where Gable's slapping him in the face before the NCAAs. He's like, I got to get some energy out of this guy. And Gable was getting like pissed. He's like, what can we do with this guy? But I mean, Joe was a three-time NCAA champion. I think he was barely lost his freshman year. He's the first guy to really come close to four titles, if I remember correctly. Second in the world. So I mean, he was a great wrestler, but his personality was such that, I mean, it just wasn't. So I think your personality has a lot to do with it, as far as your strengths and weaknesses as well. But anyway, there's my thoughts on trying to force kids to wrestle a certain style and why I think it doesn't work. But I do think that we do have to look at ourselves and say, okay, Brandon Slade does not wrestle like Kendall Cross, and Brandon Slade does not wrestle like John Smith, and John Smith does not wrestle like Tom Brands, and that none of them wrestle like Jordan Burroughs, but all five of those guys are Olympic champions. If
Right.
you tried to make Jordan Burroughs wrestle like Kyle Snyder, he wouldn't have been very good. But so we have to kind of start thinking, and hey, let's develop the athlete here. So it can be a big mistake trying to make everybody wrestle a certain style. I know that.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. You have to find what works best for the wrestler, and you have to, find people on the coaching staff that can, identify with that wrestler and help them out. Like
Mhm.
different styles on a coaching staff are a really good thing. Um, there's a rumor I heard, and I don't know if this was true when you were there, but this is about Oklahoma State. I think that October, November, these are like the key parts of the training cycle, right? It's before you get into competition, before you're kind of like prepping for matches every weekend and worried about competition. You get to really focus and hone in on like the things that are going to help you be successful, right? You also get a little bit over winter break, but what I heard is that there's 5 weeks in the training cycle at Oklahoma State where they don't do, and this is of course John Smith's Oklahoma State, where they don't do any live and they don't do anything but specific drilling. Have you heard that? Can you confirm or
Yeah.
deny that?
I cannot confirm or deny that, and it wasn't like that when I was there, you
Okay.
know. So I was there from like my redshirt year was 89, 90. Then he won, two, three, 94. So that 5 years. And we won the nationals three times out of the 5 years I was there. So we had a lot of success back then. And one year Penn State was good. Other than that, it was just us and Iowa. But yeah, that I cannot confirm that. It was not like that when I was there.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, because I see the attention that your club and put to drilling, right? Especially in the camp season. And then I hear these things about Oklahoma State, and then a very clear picture, starts to appear where it's like, okay, this is a coaching staff that knows a ton about wrestling. Like you said, John Smith said he felt like he had figured out wrestling, right? The low single and all the single leg finishes is a very technical thing, right? And very specific thing. So in my head, the picture that I start to see is like, hey, the style that they've gone all in on is understanding wrestling, mostly getting to a leg and finishing, the small
Yes.
adjustments, like you said, and then just, hey, we're gonna drill this more than anybody else so that it's top of mind and it's that's our route to success.
From the time I went there, we did not, that first part of the season, there was very little live wrestling, and we freaking didn't like it. And I remember Chris Barnes, he was a two-time NCAA undefeated champion, and he was a guy I looked up to and was not taken down for 2 years. And he's like, guys, just be cool. It's a long season because we're young. We're going to go,
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there were guys, and they're like, if you want to, and the coach, Bruce is like, if you guys want to go live, you can, but this is what we're doing. We've got a long season here, and it was like 10 minutes of live, maybe. And so I don't remember it being exactly 5 weeks, but after you got to talking, I do remember. And one time TJ Jaworski and Kendall Cross were wrestling live, and like after some workout, and we went to the weight room. They got done early, and they were wrestling some before we went to some next, I guess we went to do sprints or whatever, and the guy was like, "Dude, they just can't stop. They're like they got to sneak it in." And I was trying to abide by what they were saying because they had won the NCAAs the year before, but
Right.
and what Chris had said, but yeah, very very much a technical master. And the time I spent with Tommy Chesbro. He was there for 15 years and they never won the NCAA title. That's the reason he lost his job to Joe C. But Tommy was still considered, he passed years ago, but one of the most technical wrestlers, coaches ever. And but you can kind of overdo that too, right?
Hmm.
So that was some criticism was he was too technical, where I think that, Joe C and Bruce Burnett were a little bit more, so what we do is we say, well, we try to reverse engineer how to win a wrestling match. We count common positions and say, okay, what's the best 2 to 3 ways to score from there? Well, that won't work at the youth level. In the state of Missouri, they're called stalemates. You don't hammer lock, put arms behind backs because that's a potentially dangerous position. So there's things that we would like to do, but we can't because of the rules or whatever. But I do think that 95% of your points come from 5% of the wrestling. And I think that's really important for most high school kids and all youth kids. Obviously, if you're coaching someone like Bo Bassett or you're coaching at Wyoming Seminary, where you're basically assembling these great teams of great athletes, um, there's a lot more individualized coaching there, which is what the high level college coaching is nowadays, right? So they kind of have a system in place, but they're really getting good on the individuals. That's where the college coaches, you look at Tom Ryan, he's in there at 6 a.m. They're doing individuals all day long with their guys. And I've had some wrestlers who have been very not happy about it because they go to a college and they're like, dude, I'm number 3 string. I don't get any individuals. I'm getting worse, and then but the starter, if there's 46 guys on the roster, you can't go individuals with everyone. So I think that now, and Gable, I think, invented the whole individuals thing. They do have a system in place, but then they pull individuals and they do the specific work with them. And as college coaches and youth coaches and with our academy, we can do individuals as private lessons, but we very much have like a team system in place, which, we just kind of just have a handful of techniques. Like our most advanced academy room is called World Class Wrestler Program. There's 78 wrestling techniques that we really focus on, which is actually not that many. If you look at it, if you compartmentalize it from ear to ear collar tie, forehead to forehead collar tie. I'm on top with a cross wrist. Front headlock, you have, your hands on the mat. Front headlock, you have my elbow. When you start to look at this, it's not that many. And it's a couple from here, 2 or 3 from there. But I always tell people this, people complain that college wrestling is boring and not because all the matches look the same. And I'm like, that's by design. That's not an accident. Sure, Bo Nickel did some stuff, Jason did some cool technical stuff, but for the most part, we all kind of look the same, but that's not a bad thing. It's actually by design, and you should emulate that. But what happens in wrestling and in coaching is, we'll have 18-year-olds practicing half Nelsons, 6-year-olds practicing Russian 2-on-1s. It's completely stupid. I'm just sometimes surprised that American wrestling is as good as it is. It's just an unorganized mess sometimes. But I think that, you get to this high level college wrestling, they all have systems in place. And I would just guess if you were to take Iowa, Penn State, Ohio State, Oklahoma State, OU, just, heck, even Purdue, look how awesome they are. Look how great. All these colleges are just amazing. They're just a three, if they had these, if they took those 3 starters and put them on here, they would be amazing. So, the team race is kind of like there's not a lot of parity, but when you start to look at that, number 5 to 20 team, they're all damn good and right in there. I bet if you were to take all of these coaches and all of these systems, I bet you'd see a whole lot of similarities. That would be my instincts.
What would the two questions? What would the biggest similarities you think would be there? And two, well, after I'll ask you that after you answer this
Okay.
one.
The similarities between all coaches,
Yes.
all wrestlers. Um, well, core skills, you know, I mean, you stand up, 3 or 4 times a match and times 50 varsity matches, 172 times. I'm really good from there. They have the same few lifts. They all use the same tripod stand up. There's a couple ways to score from an ear to ear collar tie. I mean, it's almost just like the fundamentals. You could even call it the basics,
Yeah.
you know?
The
I
stuff
mean,
that is tried and true and works, it wrestling gets smaller, like you said.
you don't see a whole lot of difference in the leg riding that Logan Stieber did versus Zane Rutherford. You don't see Spencer Lee's better at what we call clarion tilt, armbar across wrist
Hmm.
or roll through tilt. You don't see any similar. You see, I mean, he does it the same way everyone else does. Single leg finishes, all right. If you're shoulder deep and you're running the corner, and if you're 50-50, you're coming up with it. I just think just watch the matches. And so what happens is this, and I try to teach our athletes this, and mostly educating parents, which is the hard part.
Hmm.
You know, sometimes we're like, we need a new move. And I'm like, if LeBron James taught me how to shoot a free throw, and he's like, Nick, you got it down pat, dude. It's like money. I mean, everything's here, your footwork, whatever. And I'm like, yeah, LeBron, but the ball doesn't go in the hoop. And he goes, oh, Nick, you suck. You do suck. I won't lie. You're terrible, but you're doing it right. So it comes down to execution. So sometimes just because I can drill a move perfectly, it doesn't mean I'm going to be able to hit it
Right.
on, three-time Tulsa national champ or a high school state champ or a college wrestler. And so when you start to say, man, the Purdue guy, his drilling and his matches that he wins and loses, the techniques he's using don't look much different than Penn State. Well, the Penn State's guy, when he shoots the ball, it goes in the net. He's better at it. So I think that's really where we see a disconnect, and you can argue about the reason why. But I don't feel like that if you look at a system that's in place from any of the good colleges, even the great Division II schools. I mean, there's some great D2 schools like Grandview. They could probably beat a lot of the lower tier D1 schools,
Yeah.
right? And I guarantee if you go into that practice room or Iowa State, there's probably a lot of similarities. It's just one guy, when he shoots the ball, it goes in the net. One guy, when he gets on top, he gets the wrist. And when he gets the wrist, he actually turns you. One guy has to get to his feet 5 or 6 times in high school to get one escape. The other guy gets to his feet one time, gets the escape, gets his hands locked on a cradle, back points, gets a cross wrist, refs counting. If you, and this is kind of an Oklahoma State philosophy, if I have to just be tough, it's just, if I have to stand up 7 times to get an escape, that's not good. The technician, he will get to his feet one time, maybe two, get the escape, right?
So yes, that this is something that I wanted to highlight is that Iowa seems to place a great deal on toughness, right? And Oklahoma State, from what I see, places a great deal of emphasis on efficiency, right?
Yes,
And so
bingo.
yeah, so it's like the Okie State way to finish a single leg. I've heard Coleman Scott say this, right? It's like, yeah, this is the Okie State way to finish a single leg. And it's like, well, that means that that's the best way, and that's been coined the best way because it's the most efficient and it's going to get the most amount of finishes, right? And the most amount of points with the least amount of effort, or it works against the most amount of people, right? And so like you were saying, we're about the wrestling getting smaller and going down to a fewer amount of techniques. It's like, okay, this is the move that's most efficient. This is the quad pod stand up that's going to work against the most amount of people and not leave you exhausted, right?
Bruce Burnett said, play the percentages. And he was like, we got to play the percentages, Nick. And, if, for scoring from a collar tie, if this is the best way, the best 2 or 3 ways to do it, let's just focus there. If any time outside of there, and so I use this from a system standpoint, and I talk on the phone all day about wrestling camps and things. I try to explain people some of these things. A system, let's say I have a system here on a piece of paper. A system tells you what to do. By default, it tells you what not to do. But you probably don't really know that, but you don't need to. You just need to trust. So let's say you have a weightlifting plan. Let's say you have the famous the Oklahoma State, Penn State, Iowa, Ohio State, Purdue, whatever, their weightlifting plan. and you take this into, Gold's Gym or something, you're not going to do the thigh master. You're not going to do the pulley machine. No, you're not going to sit on the pink bouncy ball. That's for the fat ladies. Get over here. And I'm like, no, I really want to do that pulley machine. There's a reverse calf hyperextension machine. They're like, bro, no, this is your plan. So we do that in wrestling, right? We're like, and I have coaches all the time, like, oh, I've got some assistants. They drive me nuts. They're coming here and they see a move on Instagram, like, hey, we really should try this. It would be good for the kids. And I'm like, no,
Hey,
it's
we're
not.
we're guilty. We're guilty of putting those moves out on Instagram, by the way.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. It's not good for the kids because what happens is this. If I go do the pulley machine and the thigh master, I can't deadlift or tire flip as much if I do that.
But
So really,
this is
it's an
actually
opportunity cost. I have an opportunity. I could right now buy a lawnmower and start a lawn mowing business, and I'd probably be damn good at it. And I'd
Mhm.
probably be one of the best in St. Louis. But then my camp business would die, my academy would die.
Right.
So that's an opportunity. You have to learn to say no. And I say no to the bouncy ball. I say no to the pulley machine. I say yes to deadlift, squats, freaking dumbbell rows, whatever. And so in wrestling, we have to do that too. Now, individually, you might have a kid who can say, hey, you know what? You you don't counter from here. You don't square like Kyle Bradley, one of our former academy kids. He's actually going to start coaching for us next year because his son's involved. Um, he had special, and we chat a lot, and he comes to practices and stuff, and he's actually lives next door to my son, and he was like, I couldn't do the Mizzou counters from a single leg because I just couldn't do it, and so we developed. He had to turn sideways and thigh block, and walk his shoestring back. And so, you see, that's the thing that a coach could do with a very high level wrestler as individualized because what we do from there isn't working for you.
Right.
Or maybe you can get away. Maybe you can use the Jason Off Win Dixie, but am I going to show that to the team of 50 kids? Hell no. Am I going to show the Jason Burrows double leg
Yeah.
in my Pee Wee practice? No, it'd be stupid. But you get that
Right.
one little freak athlete who runs the football for 2,000 yards. I'm like, hey, can you bring David to practice early? We're going to work on some things that he could use. But it would be a disservice to my group of 40 kids to show that. So I feel like a system in place built around the core skills and common positions, high percentage techniques that will only work at the college level, drill those 900 times, then individually make sure you're not chasing the idea fairy and
Hmm.
make sure you're only focusing on maybe technical things that you could implement, but those are not going to be team implementations. Those are going to be individual based.
Individual. And you actually are making the greatest argument ever for, hey, don't just follow Ocean on Instagram, buy the entire course. Because we're going to post the flashy stuff on Instagram because it does well and it gets attention. But we want you to buy the entire course so that you have that system, like you said.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you're
My
actually doing a
nephew,
great sales pitch for telling kids to buy the entire instructional. So I appreciate that.
yeah. Yeah.
The other thing is
My nephew
this,
has some of those.
I love
And
it.
I bought
This
for them. And I have a leg ride. We have a few of those on there as
Yeah,
well.
you have two courses on there. So jumping back into what you were saying, buying into a whole system rather than one single technique, Instagram, clip that you see, right? Or stuff that you think that kids can individually implement. So my question for you is, how can high school wrestling coaches implement or learn from the Okie State style, right? The John Smith style, the way he ran the program. High levels of drilling, a system for them to buy into, maybe making wrestling a little bit smaller and simpler for them to understand. What can high school wrestling coaches learn from this?
Okay, so it's called being efficient, and that's the goal is to be very efficient with your time. And when I was studying to be a teacher, we studied a guy named Harry Wong who kind of revolutionized how to teach. And I thought, okay, I'm going to do that when I got inspired. I thought I'm going to do that when I start my academy. And I was a teacher for a few years, and then we quit, moved back to St. Louis, and so number one is what he said was when the bell rings, the teacher walks in, the kids are all over the place. They might be throwing paper wads. She's like, settle down, class, settle down. And then she gets her attendance out and she's trying to take attendance, and then she has to answer a question, and then the door opens, someone's late, and all the kids laugh. And he's like, literally, you're wasting 20 minutes. So what he says is there's a bell ringer. And when you walk in, and I did this as a teacher, when you walk in, there's like three questions. And when you do all of these, they're very easy, but they're going to take about 10 minutes, and that's worth like a test grade. So now the class starts itself. So when the teacher walks in, the class is working. She takes attendance. She puts it up. She waits, right? And so I was like, man, that's genius. And so as a coach, we want to make sure that we're not wasting time. So you need to have systems in place. For example, when I was a coach, the mats were rolled out and mopped when I got there, right? And there was a system in place. And if you have organization, it takes a lot of time. And wrestling coaches, we're known for being workers. We're like, just screw it, I'll just do it. No, don't do it. We want to have a kind of a system in place. So I feel like number one is don't waste time, right? And so, we shouldn't be talking and doing butterfly stretches for 15 minutes. Dude, that's just, hey, you guys have 3 minutes to stretch. Okay. Now, mouths closed, spread out, get a partner, break on two. Here we go. And we go through our drills. So what we like to have is we have a practice plan and we have 3 sets of drill routines. I circle a drill routine. Okay. And then we have our techniques. And so what we try to do from a organization standpoint is like a gymnast. I get a lot of inspiration from gymnastics. If I'm working balance beam today for 3 hours, it's only balance beam. I don't go from apparatus to apparatus. Then I might do this for 2 days. Then maybe tomorrow I'm on beam, or I'm on floor. Okay, now I'm on floor. And so in wrestling, I think it's best to have a warm-up plan, and your warm-up should be some calisthenics and also some maybe acrobatic type stuff, athleticism development, but it also should be technique, some technique, right? We call it the 7 deadly moves. Because what happens is if we're practicing top and bottom today, or we're only practicing leg riding tomorrow for an hour and 40 minutes, and then Thursday is secondary attacks, or secondary attacks and front headlock. If you have an advanced group, you're going faster paced practice. Now, then you're doing leg attacks on Monday. You're like, dude, they haven't hit a leg attack in 6 days. We cannot do that. So what you do on your warm-up plan is you take your top stuff, you take your mat returns, you take your front headlock, whatever technical areas. We're only going to spend time on leg attacks today. Okay. But now we're ignoring a down block go behind. That should be hit every day. In high school, I think, a slide by should probably be hit every day because those kids collar tie a lot and they don't do it right. Okay, how about I call it an Eastern roll, right? I learned it from Jordan Oliver when he was 12. He teched one of our kids, and that's what his coach called it. And now he became Jordan Oliver. So they call it an Eastern roll, but we call it roll through tilt, like a Spencer Lee. You should probably drill that every day. Okay, so your warm-up plan, we might have 2 or 3 warm-ups. They're organized. You don't say, okay, team captain, you're in charge of the warm-up today. No, he doesn't do anything. He's a kid, all right? This piece of paper just dictates what we do. Now, on all 3 of those warm-ups, or however many you have, you should make sure that they're hitting a single leg to a quick change off. Snap down, run the corner. Okay. So anyway, I feel like organization is number one, and you can take inspiration from like a very good teacher. And number two, like I said, when I was since they're doing a team and not academy like I am, what we did was I had a piece of paper taped to the wall. This is your warm up. And there was about 3 of them we rotated through. So the kids walk in. I walk in, maybe the principal has a question, maybe the trainer's like, hey, we got to check this kid out. I'm not letting him on the mat. You know how you get distracted as a coach. But guess what? I walk in the practice room, the mats are mopped, they're already dry, the kids are working, and it's quiet. Might be a little radio on. Why? Because there's a piece of paper taped to the wall. They got to hit, 15 of these, 15 of these, 15 of these. So number one, a coach needs to get more organized and quit wasting kids' time. We don't need to do any running, maybe a little jog, okay, but we don't need to run the hallways for 40 minutes. I still have
Hmm.
parents who call me, they're like, dude, we run the hallway. I'm like, how much live wrestling do you get? 10 minutes. I'm like, it's crazy. The cross country team doesn't wrestle at practice. Why are we doing cross country? It's completely silly. So I would say get drill routines in place, have have a system in place for the mat skating organized and mopped, have a practice plan taped to the wall. That should take about 20 minutes so that the kids have the practice started. And then we're like, okay, it's front headlock day. And you can really hammer. Now, could I get through a two-page practice plan in my academy, tonight? Yeah, if we hit 3 reps of everything. But isn't it best just to just to stay on the balance beam for 2 or 3 hours, and then tomorrow just to stay on the vault? So that's why we like to have, we call it sections, right? I'm just picking a section. And we talk about drill routines, not moves. Random moves. That's what we do in wrestling. It's completely crazy. Is imagine being a math class and your teacher has 4 books, right? You have pre-algebra, algebra, geometry, algebra 2. And they're like, take out the algebra 2 book, turn to chapter 47. Now look at question number 3. Now let's go back to our pre-algebra book. Go to chapter number 19. And you're basically you're doing math, but you're bouncing all over the place. So in wrestling, we're like, no, we are pre-algebra. And we're going to start on chapter 1. And
Hmm.
then we would do chapter 2. And so that's what we do. And so we broke wrestling down into phases, right? And it's on our online academy that's already on Ocean, but it's also on a different platform. But we have basics, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. There's 4 levels to wrestling, just like pre-algebra, algebra, geometry. And so what happens is in coaching, we're so unorganized that we've got random 14-year-olds running the warm-ups. Sometimes the mats are mobbed. We don't know who's doing that. We got random coaches showing practices that off of an Instagram video that they saw.
Hmm.
And then we're doing too much time doing butterfly stretches and running, and we're just not even getting better at wrestling. So I think organizing, just like we talked about a weightlifting program, when you go
Hmm.
to Gold's Gym with the weightlifting plan, you're not going to touch 99% of that equipment. But everything is system, all right? You do 1 set of 5 after your warm-up set. You have a 90-second break. Get your stopwatch. Ding, ding, ding. It's time for part 2. So I tell my coaches, I make them. They have a clipboard with a sticky note. They have a stopwatch and a whistle because everything is done kind of military style. So as far as the system is concerned, I think if coaches would just write down, what do we do from a front headlock? What do we do from top? What are we going to do from bottom? What are we going to do from an ear to ear collar tie? What's our main leg attacks and finishes? But they need to also get quite a bit smaller than a college coach because high school coaches forget this one thing. Their kids aren't going to wrestle 8 months a year. They're only there 4 months a year. And they go, well, I got 6 days a week with them. No, you don't. After the first 3 weeks, guess what you have? Dual meet on Tuesday, tournament Friday night, tournament all day Saturday, no practices on Sunday. You get 3 practices a week with those kids. That's all you get. So are you going to have a 5-page drill plan? No. So you got to really get more organized than a college coach because they literally have those guys 26 hours a week, pretty much year round.
Yeah,
So that's
a
what I
hundred
thought.
percent. I no, I love that. It's very, very true. Um, I've seen high school wrestling rooms that are very organized, like you said, like they need to be, right? And then
Some
I've seen
crazy good coaches out there.
yeah, and then I've seen the opposite where it's like, well, I was pretty good at this, so I'm gonna show it to you. And then it's like, okay, but then we're also jumping from, you know, I had a great high school coach, Dan Lovelace, right? And so he
Yeah,
was
I
like,
know
"Hey,
Dan. I just talked with Eric yesterday. His
really?
son.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, they're my favorite people. I love them so much. But we would be like, "Hey, we're doing 2-on-1s today." Right. And we're going to do things from that position. Right. Where I've also seen other high school coaches are like, 1 second they're in the front headlock, the next they're shooting a high crotch, and the next they're doing like something on top. And it's like, guys, we need to spend the entire practice on leg riding if we're going to
Yeah.
get better at leg riding.
Yes.
You need to chain these things together, right? And so, talk a little bit about that, just like focusing on a one, like you said, the beam, right? Or like we're going to spend the time on the floor to make the gymnastics analogy, right?
So I would say a drill routine from a position. So if it's a front headlock, now if your high school team has 27 first year kids, they're probably only going to practice a couple of things from there. Your more advanced kids are gonna, but then eventually your new kids are gonna. Your goal would be to get your new kids involved with the practice with everybody else, you know.
Right.
But so you say, you know, like at our 14-day camp, we have 7 ways to score from a front headlock, and 2 of those are counters to counters, right? So, but we don't do 7 ways to score from a front headlock at our 5-day camp because that would not be good for my athletes because they deserve better. So they learn less, but they get more reps, right? And so as a coach, you have to say, what do I got here? So when coaches use our online program, I might only focus on phase 1 and the basics phase. Don't even worry about phase 2 and 3. That's for home use, right? And because what happens is, since you only have 3 practices a week with your team, you really got to get organized in what you're doing. And as far as the technique side of it goes, when you start to think about drill routines, which is a series of techniques from a position, and so what happens from a front headlock off of a down block, right? We're probably going to try to run the corner. If not, and we have a wrist trap. What if they grab my elbow? What if they grab high tricep and they're circling out? So my opponent dictates what I do next. And that's when we have a routine of moves. And usually they're from a different reaction from my opponent, and we can do that with a single leg too, right? So if I'm in a single leg and you didn't sprawl, I can bring the leg up to a high level position, or I can stay on my knee and quick change off, which is probably a better option. So that's a 100% shot and a 0% sprawl. What if you square your hips and sprawl? Now I'm 75-25. What if I'm 50-50? What if I shoot a single leg and I miss completely and you catch me in a front headlock? That's a 0% shot with a 100% sprawl. So when you start to look at your drill routines, really what we're doing is just organizing wrestling into a pattern of what my opponent does. And that
Yeah.
should be taught it should be taught in an order. We shouldn't teach, okay, let's go on a front headlock when our opponent's to their feet. Let's score on a front headlock when they're in a tripod. Let's score on a front headlock when our opponent grabs their elbow. Oh, now we're back on our feet. We have a second way to, no, let's just do both of those together. And that's the bouncing around effect that we have. So that's my point. You just pick front headlock and have a series of techniques from there. The series you use for your Pee Wee team of 5-year-olds is going to be different than the series you use for your Pee Wee team of 14-year-olds who've been wrestling 8 years. And your series that you use for high school will probably be like the 14-year-old high level, right? But then you have the high school kid and boys and girls who have never wrestled before. You have an onboarding process for them. And it sounds confusing, but I guarantee you, we have 26 practices a week in our academy. We had almost 500 athletes training with us before high school season started. I coach 1 practice a week. and we're winning. We had 186 state medalists last year. We've had 91 kids go to college wrestling the past 5 years, $47,000 average scholarship, and we had 39 kids go D1. And we're in Missouri, right? Missouri is good wrestling, but we're not Pennsylvania. We're not Iowa. We're not Southern California. We're putting Missouri kids out there. And you say, Nick, how do you do that? How are your coaches doing having that success? And I'm like, I coach 2.5 hours a week because I have a system in place and I've taught my coaches how to do it. And we have a Academy Core Skills, Academy Elite, and Academy World Class Wrestler program. And we're starting beginners next fall. So I've done everything that I'm explaining to you, and I've been doing it for years. And it takes a lot of work and hassle, but once it's done, it's
Beautiful.
like it's like you're building a deck and you're like, dude, this is my 15th deck this year.
Hmm.
I got three blueprints. It's not a big deal. But the first time you built the deck, and that's where most people and my brother used to have a phrase, I'm just gonna go back to doing what I always do. And he says it like that. It's pretty funny. People do that. They try something new and they're trying something that's not probably going to work anyway. And that's not a good thing. But if you have a system, if I have a weightlifting plan from a college coach and it's uncomfortable implementing this weightlifting plan, and you say, screw it, I'm just going to go back and do what I always do. No, that's the reason you got the plan to begin with. Can we not turn our ADD off for 5 minutes? Let's give it. And I told my coaches, just give it 2 months. Just really get your youth coach, give them a system, put one youth coach in charge. The other dads don't have a whistle. They but have tape on their mouth. You're in charge. Now we have our JV coach and our beginners coach. Then we have our varsity coach. And then I have one team captain. He has one job here, right? Whatever. And when you really spend the time in the beginning, you have a program that runs itself instead of running you. Because what happens in high school coaching, especially, is we like to do all the work anyway because we feel good about it. We love feeling how we feel after a hard day's work. And and but what happens is, you're about to get a divorce, you haven't seen your kids in 3 months, and your team sucks, and you're just like, this sucks. I hate it. And
Right.
instead of going harder, let's just calm down and get organized and have a team meeting and get my coaches on board. And and then you have coaches drilling in drill routines from common positions. And now it's literally a program that runs itself versus a program that runs you. And that's no different. And there's so much correlations between business and wrestling.
I was about
Um,
to say, yeah,
I've learned, and this was one of my goals, The Ultimate Sales Machine. I read that book like 800 times. It revolutionized my life about 15, 18 years ago. It said, you should be able to go on vacation for 2 weeks. And when you come back, your business is still operating and there's more money in the bank account than when you left.
right.
And so I was like, I've already done that for wrestling.
Hmm.
Now I need to do that for our business. And that's whenever we started hiring coaches, adding locations and everything.
Right.
So, this advice I'm giving, dude, Walmart does it. Go into
Right.
McDonald's. There's 14-year-olds that run McDonald's
You're
that
making it
have
an
systems in
organization.
place. Yeah. So there you go.
No, I love it. I think that piggybacking off of that, I think that all athletes should also write down their own system, right? They should write down from each position, what are the moves that you hit, right? They should have an arsenal. And I know that's something I've done in the past that's helped me a lot, right? It's just
Mhm.
like you said, make wrestling smaller. Yeah, there's more moves than I know from a 2-on-1. There's more moves that I know from an underhook. But you know what? When I get there, I'm going to hit my bread and butter, my two. And when it's time to drill and I have like time on my own to drill, I'm going to work those moves because those are what's going to work the highest at the highest level. And they're the ones that I'm going to focus on and have the most confidence in. So it's also on the kids. The kids need to have their own arsenal and things that they study and they hone in on and they're confident in hitting, right? So it's a coach's getting organized thing, but it's also an athlete's getting organized thing.
Yeah, so I like to do this, and we tell our athletes this at our camps and stuff, because at our 28-day camp, we have our last seminar is how to individualize your wrestling. Okay. Now we have, let's say we have 7 ways to score from a front headlock. Two of those are counters to counters. You have to have that. I mean, you have to have, there's certain things you have to have, right? Like your opponent's going to grab a collar tie. We have to know how to wrestle from there. But we have 5 ways to score from our opponent's collar tie. 3 ear to ear, 2 forehead to forehead. You only got to pick one from ear to ear and one forehead to forehead. So even though, so it's my job to give you five, and it's your job to pick one or two. And it's your job to say, this is how I score from a front headlock. Now, coach has a lot of different things, and we drill them every day. You never know. You're like, dude, I used a shuck in the state finals, and I haven't hit a shuck in a match in 5 years, your dad says. And I'm like, yeah, but I hit it in practice once a week. Every Wednesday's front headlock day, and it was just there. I don't know why I hit it. And like John Smith used to say, one time he hit a double leg. He's like, what the hell did I just do? I'm like, yeah, a double leg. He's like, I don't think I've hit a double leg since I was 5, but he had one.
Uh-huh.
So I do think that you're right. So number one, we have to give them not too many options, but a handful from our common positions, and drill them every week. My heavyweights drill those single legs, right? They may not use, but they might. It's still good for their athleticism. It's not like, a waste of time. But I do encourage our athletes to do that as well. And I like to go through this kind of there's a few steps involved. So I have them get a piece of paper and they write a line and then they write down their strengths and weaknesses. And one is like maybe mental, psychological strengths and weaknesses. And we do that on maybe our mental game seminar. But from a wrestling standpoint, because some weaknesses are perceived, they're not real weaknesses. I had a kid, um, Cole Blattner. He just won his 200th wrestling match. He's in Central Missouri. He's been wrestling since he was a kid. And one time he came up to me and he's talking about he was all stressed out. Now he won 500 matches in kids wrestling, probably six, right? And I know for a fact, yeah, he wrestled a lot. Some people like that's too much wrestling. Well, he loved it. So he's had a lot of success. And I'm like, who told you you're not a fast wrestler? He goes, my dad. And I'm like, I think you're a quick wrestler, but you're not explosive like Jordan Burroughs. So he had this weakness. So look at what if Kerry Colott, who's like 5'4", so is being short a weakness or is it a perceived weakness? Is being tall? I have so many tall wrestlers, parents who say they're so tall, they give up their legs easy. Well, I'm like, well, Sativ was tall. He's a 13-time world champion. David Taylor's tall and lanky. Jason Nolf's tall and lanky. They did just fine. Zahid Valencia is tall and lanky. I go, maybe it's a perceived weakness because you haven't learned to use that.
Hmm.
So Kerry Colott and Brandon Slay wrestle differently than Zahid Valencia, and right. So I think when you write down your strengths and weaknesses, and then I have them listen to me talk about perceived strengths and weaknesses, then I'm like, being tall is not a weakness because a guy next to you is short and he says that's a weakness. So which one of you is correct? Because when you look at this, then we say, okay, now I might need, well, Kerry Colott probably doesn't even have to worry about his stance too much. He's can't not be in a stance. Whereas you watch Zahid Valencia, he's really bent over. He's protecting that. So I think that when we start to look at individualizing our wrestling style, sometimes I'm sure it happens on its own. I don't think Jordan Burroughs probably had to go into a scientific wrestling lab to figure out that he was explosive. He's probably just like, holy shit, I can shoot from 11 foot away. And then Mark Manning, who's a smart coach, says, let's do more of that. Right.
Yeah.
And that's when your wrestling gets smaller. So I
Hmm.
think that you can overthink it. And I like to tell our athletes, just trust your instincts. What do you like to do? Well, I have a great ankle pick. I'm like, you have a great bent over stance. You have a great thumb block. You're 7 foot away from your opponent. Yeah, your Cael Sanderson ankle pick is money. do more of that,
Right.
right? But so I do think that a lot of it comes down to your body type. And then also you look at someone like Kendall Cross, who was my teammate in college. He talks about not being explosive. And he said this one night, this was like 12, 13 years ago. He stayed at my house. We went to the NCAAs in St. Louis. It was like 2 in the morning. We were talking and shit. And he was like, when I was in middle school, and he said this at Mustang, he goes, I felt like I got shunned by my coaches. And because they always put the little fast, explosive kids in the room to demonstrate what good wrestling was like. And he was like, Nick, I could destroy these guys. And he won everything as a kid, right? He's like, I haven't lost in 5 years. And he was like, and he said at a young age, he was like, screw you guys. I'm not going to listen. I'm just going to worry about making myself better. And he developed a style of wrestling. He was an NCAA champion and an Olympic champion. There is no better than that. And he literally is not fast. I guarantee you he's not fast. And he joked about it, but
Hmm.
he's an Olympic champion. So people say, my kid's not fast. I go, Dave Schultz wasn't fast. They make movies about him. I go, don't try to wrestle fast. I'm
Hmm.
not explosive. Don't try to wrestle explosive. I'm not powerful like Kyle Schneider. Okay, he can pick 1,800 pounds off the floor. You can't. Now you should probably lift weights. It's not a bad thing to get stronger, but you may not be a Terry Brand style of wrestler because you're not freakishly powerful. So I
Play to
think
your strengths.
things. Yeah, those are some talking points.
Yeah, absolutely. So, final question for you. If you are building a system, right, you should have one singular option from every position that you get into. I get into this position, I know I'm doing this. I go into this position, I know I'm doing this. Should you break it down to one or should you have a couple?
Well, it depends on the age. So, if I was a high school coach and I'm coaching a varsity team of experienced guys, we're probably not working a lot of half Nelson counters from our belly, right? But
Hmm.
if I was a Pee Wee coach coaching 4 to 7 year olds, we probably would, right? You don't see a lot of high school kids flattened out in their belly fighting a half Nelson.
Right.
So, you have to, and that's one reason we do have coaches come in as guest instructors to our academy on occasion. Isaac Galenik was there recruiting some of our girls because he's the Oklahoma State women's coach. And I was out of town. So I was hunting in Canada. So I didn't get to see it, but they said he did a great job. But like I've had coaches from like D2 schools, D3, NAIA, Division I schools, and some of them, they kind of do a terrible job because they don't realize they're wrestling. And I'm like, dude, I can't even follow this.
Hmm.
But they're teaching wrestling on such a high level of college wrestling. And I'm like, now these are some very advanced wrestlers in this room, but I mean, this 6D chess chase the leg, it doesn't work. But they haven't been in the gutter. But you
Right.
get a college coach who has a son who's like 13 and you get him into my academy,
He's
he's going to do
aware.
an awesome job. So I feel like I would probably just have one technique from that position, and then you start to get into more advanced youth or middle school or high school wrestling. Then I would have a few. But, let's say from a single leg, I'd probably only have two if I get a single leg and they don't sprawl. But if I'm in 50-50 position, I would kind of have one. So from a common position like a front headlock, I'd give them more than one option from a front headlock. But if my opponent gets to their feet, I would just have one option from there. So it
I
depends
love
on
it.
the of the kids.
I love it. Final thoughts on Oklahoma State. Are you excited for the David Taylor era?
Yeah, it's fun. So like I said, I wrestled there. It changed my life. I'm still a very big Oklahoma State fan, and I watch very closely, and it's very interesting to see. And David Taylor was like 10 years old when I started my academy back in late 1999. It's like 2001, I think I went to Tulsa Nationals for the first time, and a couple of my kids were getting wrecked by David. Like the Lesters, they were all Americans at OU, national champions, Fargo champions. And I'm like, who the hell is this kid? And I was like, we got to try to beat him. And so I've been a fan of his. You have never seen a kid wrestle so effortlessly in your life. So uh, I've been a David Taylor fan since, for 26 years now because I used to coach against him, and always just a great boy. And now he's a great young man. I chatted with him at high school nationals last year, and I kind of know his dad. And just knowing, just seeing a kid who I used to coach against when he was a 10-year-old kid, it really makes me feel old, but it's a lot of fun. But I'm a fan of wrestling. I'm a fan of people having success. But my heart's with Oklahoma State because I wrestled there, and it's a fun time. It's good to see, and it's good to see John retired, having fun. He's a good dude. So we'll see what happens.
I love it. I love it. You could check out your courses on Ocean.
Yes.
I'm excited. You were texting me that even more going to be on there soon, so I'm excited for
Yeah.
that.
Yep, we're doing a college recruiting kind of course as far as just the nuts and bolts, and a confidence course. I feel like a lot of times in wrestling, I struggle with this. I think we all have, and a lot of times parents and coaches, they don't know what to say to their wrestler before or after a match. Sometimes we screw it up on accident. So we have a few more courses out there, including how to build a program and a team that can kind of run itself. And your goal is to be like Rob Cole said. You want to be a CEO, not the head coach. And Brian Smith at Mizzou, he's incredible. He's a CEO. Rob Cole's a CEO. Tom Ryan, that dude's a CEO. He's built teams everywhere he's gone. And so I think as a high school coach, even a youth coach, if we start to look at ourselves as a CEO of a small business, I think that would be beneficial. And so that's going to be one of our courses too, that we're putting together.
I love it. I can't wait. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it, and we should do it again.
All right. Thank you. I love it. And I appreciate you guys having me.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks for coming on, Nick.